Hey everybody, welcome to Leading Thriving Cities. My name is Chad Wright. I'm the founder of Forward Partners. This is our show where we shine a spotlight on leadership in public service, and we have deep conversations about sustainability and how we create a thriving future for our cities. Today's guest is Jack Daly. He is the Assistant Director of Public Works for the city of Georgetown. I love this conversation because Jack and I really dig into the value of helping people feel heard, whether that's the public or your team. And one of my favorite parts is where we really talk through how do we become more efficient in terms of productivity so we can do the really inefficient things that are really effective, like sitting with individual team members, really hearing them and helping them create a plan for their future. Such a great conversation. And listen, if you don't know what a transfer station is and you're a giant nerd, you're going to learn. It's one of my favorite parts of what we talk through. I learned what a transfer station is. Thank you for joining us today on Leading Thriving Cities. Jack, thank you so much for being on Leading Thriving Cities. I've heard so much about you from multiple people, which gets me pumped up to have these interviews.
Well, likewise. I'm excited to be here.
This will be good. So we're going to jump right in with the first question. What's one thing you wish people understood? Because you're an assistant director of Public Works,
yep.
And you and I discussed off mic. The Georgetown Public Works is very interesting. You've
yes.
got a lot of different elements that some might not have.
Yeah.
What do you wish people understood about Public Works?
Public Works or the city in general, I think what is important for people to know is like your engagement with the city is two-way, right? Mm-hmm. Like anything, you need to put something into it to get something back.
Yeah.
And like a lot of times, Public Works, the easy example is a pothole, and people get frustrated at the pothole that they see every day. But unless somebody says something about it, we may or may not know about it. We don't have people roaming proactively trying to solve everybody's problems. We're very complaint-based, naturally, because we're constrained. But we are responsive, and we do try to, take care of people when they reach out to us. But we are not omnipresent, omnipotent, right? We don't know everything all the time. I think a lot of people give us too much credit. Like, if you see something, say something, and that will make your experience with the city better. Because I get it all the time that people are like, I put this in, I didn't expect anybody to follow up. I'm like, well, I'm going to follow up if you send me a note. So, and that's across the board in Georgetown.
That's interesting. I wonder if we have do we have a low bar for what we expect from government in terms of response?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. And it's really a struggle because, Uber, right? When you order an Uber, it's like, hey, we got it. We'll tell you in 1 minute, you're going to have this person. They're going to be here in 4 minutes. Yeah. They're going to text you when you're here. You're going to get in. Bar. You're going to know exactly to the second when you get dropped off. Yeah. You're going to write a review. You know what. Government's not set up like that, right? Yeah. I'm not saying we can't be, but people's expectations don't pivot. When I work with Uber, I'm not all of a sudden like, well, this will be a less good quality customer service experience, right? And it's getting better and better. Amazon is wonderful.
Yeah. I love ordering something that's there the next day.
Exactly. And so we're in that environment too. And I think, just being responsive, just saying, hey, I got it, that gets you a lot of credit. And even if you say like, I'm sorry, we can't do anything with this, or this is going to be, hey, it's in the plan, but it's 10 years out. I know that's not what you want to hear. Yeah. More often than not, people are like, I'm glad somebody thought about it, right?
There's something about that, right? There was a quote that we used the other day that we posted. It said, a man can survive anyhow as long as he has a why. Mm-hmm. So if we explain to people why things are the way they are, they go, okay, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. Yeah. But it's taking the time to do that. And I know y'all, in Georgetown, y'all have a very sharp focus on customer service. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes hand in hand with y'all's sharp focus on leadership development, because I think the two are very closely tied together. Does that focus on customer service, it's saying, yes, we're the government. Yes, we can be responsive if nothing else. And we're going to fix the problem even if it takes a while. Is that focus on customer service? How does your team respond to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing that makes Georgetown maybe different than other cities is how fast we're growing. And we have, a lot of new employees. We have a lot of employees who've been there for a long time. And so to give people these a la carte email responses. Go out and do a site visit and talk with somebody is great. It is getting more challenging as we grow and get more complicated, and our resources are more constrained, and we're trying to be more methodical about our work. So I don't know if I have a perfect answer to it, but we do, at the very least, just say like, hey, received, we're working on it, and commit to keeping a conversation going with somebody.
It's interesting how far just the message of received
Mm-hmm.
goes.
Absolutely.
I find often when we go wrong, it's because we have no idea, did they even get this? Did this get lost in the shuffle? So even just a simple received changes everything, because you go, okay, someone is on this. I'm not connected to another human.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. So do y'all find that practice then helps internally? So if you're focused on how do we serve the customers well, does that then translate to better communication internally?
Yeah, I think so. And what's been interesting, on internal communications, what I tell people is, your crisis or your challenge is not going to be, I'll throw them out there, the city attorney's crisis or challenge, right? So
that's the second time I've heard that today.
Okay, there you go.
Similar version of that.
So it's fair. And so, a big focus of mine is developing and maintaining those internal relationships. So being responsive to them when they send me something goes a long way. And then as you learn, I'm not an attorney, but I kind of know their template for a contract, right? So I can take my junior attorney best effort try and put something together and say, hey, can you react to this? Yeah. Versus, I got nothing. Do my work for me, right? Yes. And so it's these approaches to the internal relationship that I think help keep that relationship really positive and productive. And then the other thing is, structured touch points. Something I had a lot of success with early on. I have code compliance, code enforcement, and there's always a rift between the code officers and the prosecutor, because the prosecutor won't always take your case, your case that you worked months and months on, and this is horrible. I can't believe we're not throwing the book at these people. So a really simple thing was, we structure a monthly prosecutor hour, and our code officers kind of talk through, hey, here's a tricky case I'm thinking through. What are you going to be looking for? And that seems so simple, right? Yeah. But they have learned, okay, Lucas, our prosecutor, Lucas Wilson, great guy. What is Lucas going to be looking for? Here's, I know I need to make these touches, right? Like letter, knock on the door. Have I, done everything I can to make contact? Have I offered extensions, right? And doing these things. And through that, Lucas has gone to bat on some stuff big time that I think historically has not happened, because we haven't been really purposeful about that relationship with them and saying, well, what do you need?
Yeah. Have your people also learned how limited Lucas and his office's capacity is, that they have too much on them versus what they can actually prosecute?
Yeah, or I would say, his constraints are the Constitution, right? Like you can't just go in and do stuff, right?
Constraint.
Yeah, so they've learned, like, okay, notice is really important. How we notice,
are we doing
is
the
this
process
violation
correctly?
Actually in ordinance? It's not just like you don't like the look of this, right?
Yeah.
Them knowing, hey, we got to really paper this up.
Yes.
We got to take really good case notes. We got to track all our contacts, and that really helps. We're building the case for Lucas to go, yep, this makes a lot of sense. It checks all the boxes. Here we go. Yeah.
Checking all the boxes to get that easier
yes. Yeah.
Okay. And all that is relationship building.
Absolutely.
Is this something that you've learned through your career, or are you a natural relationship builder?
That's a good question. I think early on in government, right or wrong, I had my newly minted public administration degree. I was so excited. I was like, this is a meritocracy, and I did good, so I should be able to get ahead. And pretty quickly on, you realize it's who you know and how you're able to leverage those relationships. And that's just human nature. And I think that's just something you learn as you work in a place for a long time and you see, who's successful, who isn't. It's the ones who can navigate. The people can be really a lot more productive.
Well, it seems like this has transformed from that's how you get ahead is those relationships to actually this is how you get things done.
Yes.
This is how you actually are productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things you mentioned was, your emergency is not necessarily everybody else's emergency. In public works, there are a lot of emergencies.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm curious, are y'all good? What I find sometimes is when you get into emergency management mode, everything starts to look like an emergency. Are y'all good at the distinction there of, okay, this is an emergency, we got to move fast, we got to make decisions quickly, and this isn't. We can take time, we can ponder, we can kind of figure out all the context and make the best decision moving forward?
I think we're getting better. So we have our emergencies. The big winter storm in 2023.
Yes.
We had 150,000 cubic yards of brush that we picked up. That's all we did for 60 days.
Yeah.
That was an emergency. We're still working on our federal reimbursement from that. The day-to-day emergencies. I'll throw my city manager out there. I think a lot of times, somebody gets a message from the city manager and it's like, oh my gosh, drop everything and do that.
Yeah.
And that can be really disruptive if that's
and they
how
don't
you
necessarily say that, but that's how it feels,
right?
Yeah,
you're getting, that's my boss's boss's boss, right? And he's emailing me directly like, hey, but going back to making sure your employees are empowered to say, hey, received, I got this. Here's when I will be able to get to it. It may be Friday, it may be Monday.
Yeah.
Is that cool with you? 9 times out of 10, sure. I'm just glad you have it. Thanks for being communicative, and then be on your way. But it's scary for people. The city manager or any person in authority is, that's the big boss, and you want to look impressive. But if you're constantly putting out other people's fires, you never get a chance to get to your own. I'm not saying we're perfect at that. It's actually a big struggle all the time.
Yes.
Because you get rewarded for being responsive, right?
Yes. Well, you get rewarded externally and internally as a human, right? Like we're responsive, and suddenly it feels like, oh my gosh, I solved a problem.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yeah,
I'm amazing.
It was great. Like he get in an hour, I had his problem solved.
Yes.
But maybe I got nothing else done that day.
Exactly. So I'm curious how they have modeled that safety for you to push back a little bit, because it's one thing to say, hey, it's fine. Just if you can't get to this, let me know. But to get people to actually do that is actually really hard. You have to kind of model it over and over and over again to prove that it's safe.
Yeah. I think, so I'm fortunate. I started my career in Georgetown as an administrative assistant. So working for Lori Brewer, who's one of our assistant city managers. She's phenomenal.
Yes.
And then
future guest on the show.
Oh, excellent.
Cannot wait to have her.
Good. But then I got to be the assistant to the city manager for David, so working directly with David. And through that, I got to see a lot of other directors or managers' interactions with him, and saw other people outside of my department or chain of command modeling that behavior and saying, like, okay, that is a really effective way to manage your work. Yeah. So I think seeing others kind of outside of my world do that, and then, now I'm out here in public works, and I have that insight, to help people, hey, it's not the, it doesn't have to be the priority. Now, different things, there's something in the road.
Again,
yes, we're going to go pick that up.
And there
right?
are the true emergencies.
Yeah.
Everything gets put, I think, into the emergency bucket, because again, you're right. There is the external. There's also that internal validation. So let's just call it all an emergency.
Yes. Yeah.
But we can't. It's exhausting. That's not sustainable.
Yes. And then you don't, get those, important but non-urgent things. That's quadrant 2 stuff, right? It doesn't get taken care of.
That's the category that gets lost in the process. That's interesting. So before we started recording, you told me that public service and getting in the city of Georgetown after your graduate degree, this was your first grown-up job.
Yes, yeah.
And so now you've been in it a while at this point.
Yeah.
What have you had to overcome in that time? What internally have you really had to kind of wrestle with and fight with to get where you are today and to lead the way you lead?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I have 2 answers.
Love it.
I took my notes here. So I think what's interesting, and I was telling you earlier, I have young kids, and so the things that served me really well early on in my career, be super responsive. Don't say no to anything, no job is below me. Yes, I will do that. Yes, I'll be on this committee. As I have gained more responsibility, and I have more responsibilities at home, if I don't say no to things or don't try to be responsive to everything, it's going to fall apart. And that is really hard for me to, acknowledge. And it's something I work on. Like, okay, I cannot operate the same way and be successful. And, this is kind of a different stage of life, different stage of my career versus that early part where you were really successful. And that's a struggle I work through all the time. But
it was interesting. It was actually at TCMA. I think it was a gentleman from y'all's team, not for Public Works, but from the city of Georgetown. I don't know if he was a student intern or what his role was, but he asked a question about that. We did a session on burnout, and he asked about like the how do we navigate that as young people when it is you just say yes to everything, right? And the one thought I had to really think about it for a while, and the thought I had was, we do need to say yes to a lot of things. However, we also need to put our career on a much longer timeline. I think there's this feeling of, well, if I haven't accomplished X by X time, I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And that's never based in reality. You've got this massive multi-decade career in front of you. So let's say yes to a lot of new experiences, but let's do it sustainably. If we cross that mark, like your kids are forcing you to have more limits and boundaries, right? Those limits and boundaries, there were some there before. You have to sleep a certain amount. You have to rest a certain amount, right? And when you're young, it's just, let's just say yes to all of it, And ultimately, if we slowed that down and made that a little more sustainable, because here's my fear, is that we start there and your kids have forced you to learn a different rhythm. What if you didn't have kids?
Yeah.
And we build that muscle of this is success, I've always got to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Then I run into people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s who have never learned how to say no.
Yeah.
And they're burned out and they're miserable and they make everyone below them miserable. And so that's my fear, is what we start, we never find a different way.
Yeah.
I love that kids are forcing that for you.
Absolutely.
Mine did the same thing.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. There was a keynote at the ICMA conference. I think the guy's name is Jason Dorsey, maybe. But he was talking about Gen Z coming into the workforce, actually, because they think, I'll never be able to retire. I'm going to have to work for 70 years. So I am going to take Fridays off because I got to make this sustain.
More sustainable.
Yeah, so it's interesting that is forcing. And he had some other things, that the Gen Z is really good at saving, and they really want purpose in their life, and they really want to stay and have an impact in organization.
So many strengths,
And he's like, if you covered up Gen Z, that's really similar to baby boomer.
Yeah.
And when that went off, I was like, oh, that's so great. That's
What's
really good.
hilarious about this, though, is the baby boomers, the Gen X's in the room are looking at I want my Fridays off, and we're going, that's lazy. When in fact, it's probably wisdom. It's going, hey, I'm going to have to work into my 70s.
Yeah.
I can't do that if I'm working 7 days a week. It doesn't last.
Yeah.
That is super interesting.
Yeah, he was really good. So I'd recommend looking him up.
That's very cool. I actually saw a lot of posts from people that were at ICMA about that talk specifically.
Yeah, he was really good.
Yeah, there's so many strengths the younger generations bring to the table, and we miss those because they're different strengths. We just look at what we're good at and what they're not and go, well, that generation, they're the worst.
Yeah.
We forget that we raised that generation. Like we created them.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if we can learn what they value and learn to adjust, that is so helpful.
Absolutely.
I've talked to a lot of leaders who have struggled with younger leaders coming in and training and just struggled with the differences in the generations. Is that something you found as y'all are having younger people come into Public Works?
Yeah. So, I've hired a few Gen Zers. We have 21 and 22-year-old folks on our team. I think, what they really, my sense is, at least, the folks I've visited with, what they want is a sense of purpose, which is awesome because local government is so easy to connect the dot, right?
Yes.
Like we are delivering purpose every day. There's so much meaning, right? Versus, there's so many jobs. I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds really boring, and you're so disconnected from, you're like 6 steps removed from your customer.
Yeah.
This is immediate. You're right there. So the purpose is there. And then more and more, we're having some ability for flexible work hours, which I think that, pay is always important. It's always, the big elephant in the room. But flexible work hours are working kind of on your terms. I think Georgetown is at the forefront of doing that. So we, not every job can telecommute, but like our code compliance officers, they work a 9/80 schedule. So, in your 2-week pay period, right? You have 10 days that you work. You're going to work your 80 hours in 9 days, so you get every other Friday off. And that has been huge for them. They love that. They schedule their doctor's appointments on the off Fridays, right? So it's great for the city.
And they're not having to burn a vacation day or a sick day for that. Yeah,
exactly. And you take a Monday, and you get a 4-day weekend for burning one day. So we've done that for folks who have to be at work. You can't do code from your pajamas.
There's certain jobs. Law enforcement always going to be out there. That's hard to do from just telecommuting. You can't exactly show up to a crime scene on a computer.
Yeah, maybe one day. But
one of the things you said there was it's easy to connect the dot to purpose when you're in public service. How intentional are you at doing that? Because it's easy to connect it once, but the reality is, as humans, we have to have it reconnected for us constantly.
Yeah, and that's something I struggle with because I also know, I think I know that younger folks who work with me like, regular praise, like, hey, this was great. So I try to, as they accomplish things, just a quick email, thanks, this is great, or check in, at their desk and say, hey, that was great. It's been funny because I've gotten some positive feedback on that. Like one of our assistant emergency management coordinators, she talked to her boss who works for me, and she's like, Jack says thanks a lot. Like, is that normal? And she's like, yeah, he just is like, cares about what you do, and some acknowledgement of work. People send emails like, hey, I did this, and they'll send that to their boss. It's crickets, and you're like, oh man, what, that stinks, right? So just a simple thanks, got it, goes so far. I'm curious,
you're doing that with the younger generations because they respond well to that.
Yeah.
Have you done it more with the older generations too? Is that just how you operate?
I think it's how I operate, but it's also, David Morgan, who you had on, he models that. He is so responsive, and that is just like, some little affirmation goes a long way. That's at least for my personality type, right?
Well, that's part of why I was asking that question, because here's the thing. It honestly doesn't matter personality type.
Yeah.
I don't care what generation you're from. There's a little kid inside you going, am I okay?
Yeah.
And so to hear from a leader, you're doing great.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. And what I find is even with older generations, we start doing that, and they start lighting up. I've got one guy in a city who's been stuck for a long time. Like I've worked with his leaders for a long time. Nobody's been able to get him unstuck. They finally started getting him unstuck by giving him gold stars, literal gold stars. They did it sarcastically.
Yeah.
And he responded. He started to change. He started to go, okay, maybe I should do something. And this person who everyone had given up hope on is now doing a little better. Now, he's probably not a rock star, but he's moving towards rock star. He's getting better.
That's great.
All based on he just wants to hear he's doing okay.
Yeah.
And so there's something to that. So you told me you're 11 years into your career in Georgetown. Is that correct? Okay. So you probably have a lot of influence with younger people coming into public service. What advice do you give to them? What do you tell them?
One thing, and Mark Israelson, who's a city manager of Plano, he gave me this advice. His advice was, enjoy the work you're doing, and if you're doing really good work, like more often than not, things will work out for you. Because a lot of people, when they're new in their career, they're like, well, what should I do? Should I be a budget analyst? Should I be a management analyst? Should I be an assistant too? It's like, if you're get a job. That's hard to do. Get a job in local government, right? That's step one. And from there, you can pivot, especially in these cities we work in, kind of these medium-sized, fast-growing cities. If you are effective and hardworking and a good communicator, you can leverage that experience into a lot of different things. I have a stormwater coordinator, right? He's got a GIS degree. I can tell he's on a fast track. He will be, if he wants to be, he will be a city manager one day.
Yeah.
And he's not limited because he started in this really niche specific thing. Like he's learning how to navigate city bureaucracy. He's learning how to do enforcement on developers, right? That's really tough.
That's tough. Because they've got big wallets.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and they have a direct line to the city manager's office.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
His influence comes with that.
And so, just any experience in local government, I think, can be leveraged. And that's what I would tell people. Like, you are not going to chart this beautiful, linear career. Like, it could happen any which way. And then you don't know, you might get in and go, you know what, I really love municipal procurement. This is what I want to do, right? And you would not get the exposure to that necessarily if you tried to do, the finance route or the management analyst route.
I've talked to so many people in a city manager's office who they just needed a job, and it happened to end up in public service and found that they loved it. But the routes to a city manager's office are so varied. You can come through public works, you can come through law enforcement, you can come through the HR department, anywhere. And I find that very interesting that you can come in at all these different angles and still end up where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of a conversation that is happening in local government. Like so many people talk about just accidentally stumbling in. So if that's the case, what if we were intentional about trying to get people into local government? Because right now we have all these great people who just lucked out into it, right? So there's kind of this, I've thought about that. And the meaning piece is so easy. Like, hey, you want to have an impact at the local level. Like there's stuff I'm working on, in this, having a decade plus, you saw stuff from the inception planning stage through,
you've been
completion.
there long enough now to see that, right?
Yeah, and that's hugely rewarding. We have this transfer station. So transfer stations where, the route trucks that have trash go, and they dump into the big trucks that drive to the landfill. Yeah. And not that long ago, we were dumping on dirt and pushing it off a hill. And now we have a beautiful building that you direct dump into the trailers. And I was out there, and I was just really struck the other day. I was like, I had a small part in this, and it's really cool because this is going to be here for 50 years. And
this is why I love this show and the work we do in public service. You're not only excited that you did something, you contributed to something that'll still be there in 50 years. It's something 99% of citizens will never see. No. They have no idea the benefit that brings. Yeah. And you and I can sit here and be nerdy about it. Yeah. Be like, man, like you said, transfer station, and I went, I don't know what that is. What is a transfer station?
We can go do a tour. Know. We got a ribbon cutting October 4th. So
can we go do a live tour? John, will you come video for us? We'll do a live tour
I'll forward
of
you
the transfer station. That would be amazing.
That's great.
But I think that's such an interesting thing is people – I heard somebody say one day, if the city's doing their job, you don't even know they're there. They don't see the infrastructure that undergirds society. And there's folks showing up every day going, hey, if I do this thing really well – in a decade, this thing will exist. Yeah. And 50 years from now, it'll still be here. Yeah. That's a different style of thinking than how do I get my paycheck higher and my rank higher as fast as possible, you know?
Yeah. That's as we were building this transfer station. So it's on an old landfill, and we were excavating for the new building, and we found this pile of tires, huge amounts of tires, and it was not something we planned for.
Because then you got to do something.
Oh, yeah. So we
can't be like, let's just cover that up and pretend we didn't see the tires.
So we dug them out, we cleaned them. They went out to burn it to get recycled. And so my boss and I have been joking, like, my big goal is to not leave a big pile of tires in the ground, right? Like that's
I love that.
The people who are in our chairs 20 years from now don't find a pile of tires.
That is incredible. But I love that is, we talk about healthy leadership all the time and leaders being spiritually, emotionally, physically oriented towards health. When you're in that mode, you are others focused, not you focused. I love the others focus of 20 years from now, we don't want people unwinding our mess.
Yes.
Yeah. That is incredible.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
We'll see.
I like it. That's cool. So as what do we need to do to be more intentional about getting younger people in that want to serve a purpose? I'm curious because you said if we were a little more intentional about that, what do we need to do that better?
Yeah, I think you spoke earlier about, like the water utility. Any utility is a great example, right? Like, we don't want people to think about us. If they're thinking about us, that's a problem.
Something's probably broke.
And I think we should push back on that. Like, people, when they turn on their faucets, they should be like, oh, this is awesome.
There,
like,
right?
This is amazing. And we need to be depositing these, seeds of trust. Like, isn't this amazing that these lights turned on and you could drive on these roads and you're safe? Like, that mentality of, like, if they're not talking about us, that's good. I think is to our detriment a little bit because then nobody knows about it because it just happens.
I like that. And if we're not talking about it, nobody's going, someday I want to work in public works.
Yeah.
And we need those kids. Like, it's easy. Let's be honest. It's easy for the police. We had an episode a few back. We had a police chief give me a sticker. He said handing out stickers is one of the most valuable things they do in public service. It's easy for them. But we need kids that want to work in public works. We need kids that want to work in the water department and want to be in HR. And, and you're right. If we tell that story better, then people are thinking about the city.
Yeah,
I had a guest on one time that talked about this really deep idea that you ultimately have a relationship with your public. And if you want the public to love you, you have to love them. Mm-hmm. And I love that idea, that basic concept that we do want people to love the city, which means we got to build that relationship.
Yeah.
I think the story of the city is a big piece of that as we do a better job telling it, they get to know who we want to have that relationship with.
Well, and we were talking earlier, that relationship with the city is so under-cultivated, underused. I mean, people don't even know. We're saying they should be thankful that the water comes on, right? People have no idea where their water comes. Like, it just, there's such a lack of understanding about what local government does through no fault of anybody. I mean, people are busy. They got other things going on. The only reason I know all about it is I'm paid to know about it,
well,
right?
And the city's busy too. And so them telling that story more thoroughly is really difficult. This reminds me, I think everything in leadership comes back to marriage and parenting. I think that's why our society is the way it is. It reminds me of a couple who been together a long time, but they don't communicate. Mm-hmm. And they slowly drift apart, right? And then when something breaks, when a winter storm happens, there's no trust there to say, oh, we're going to be okay. The city's got us. We've got them. Yeah. And so there almost has to be this, how do you get to a great marriage? Eventually one person has to say, I'm going to start over communicating. Yeah. I'm going to start making sure that I'm doing what I can. And so the city can do that. The city can really tell that story well. And I think y'all do some interesting things in terms of storytelling, but there's always more to do, right? There's always more ways to invest in that.
Yeah. And I think helping, because a lot of times we default to we have a great communications and public engagement team in Georgetown. We default to, that's kind of their job, right? And it's everybody has a role in sharing the city's story, knowing something about the city and sharing the city's story and talking about it. And I think that's something we could also do better is encouraging and pushing our employees to communicate more. Something we do in code is we ask that our officers have a certain amount of touch points with HOAs throughout the year. One quarterly. It's nothing crazy. Right. But those touch points, going to an HOA meeting, being like, I'm the person that you call. Their names show up in newsletters. Like, it was so wonderful that they showed up at our meeting. Here's their name and contact. That's a thing that is a little grain of trust right there. Right. That there's a human body that is here, and
Here's
I care.
A human being that you can
I
reach
stayed
out to.
after work to come to an HOA meeting. Like, that's pretty nice.
You say that like those are not the most exciting things on the planet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really funny. That human touch point matters so deeply because now it is not just a phone number I'm calling or an email address I'm sending it to. We always talk about the idea that in order to have a thriving city, you've got to have a thriving staff because the communications department puts out a ton of communication, but y'all are interacting one-on-one with citizens all the time. And so to be able to tell that story, that is there's so many more opportunities for y'all to do it well. Yeah. But communication is a specific art.
Yes, it is.
It really takes some specific training. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, not everybody is up for that, and not every interaction is going to be a positive one, right? Especially if you're in an enforcement department or somebody who missed us. You're providing service and you missed it, or you messed it up, or your road is closed and I can't get to where I'm going. That's hard to make that be positive. But some people, they have a knack for it, and they're like the whisperer, and they're like, thank you for closing my road. I really appreciate it.
But it even goes back to what we talked about earlier. Like, some people just want to be heard.
Yes.
And so just hearing them out will make it a positive interaction sometimes.
Well, and that's, my philosophizing that I do. When somebody's unloading on, me or somebody on my team, they got this letter, I more often than not would put money down that there is something else going on in their life, a money issue, a family issue, and you get this, letter that you need to mow your grass, and I can't control anything else in my life, but I'm going to sure as heck try to control this, and I'm going to go all in on fighting this, right? And that, more often than not, that's where these really negative interactions come from. And, to your point, if you listen and say, I hear what you're saying, I know, how can we work together? Like, I don't want to be interacting with you as much as you don't want to be interacting with me. Like, how can we
I
separate
would rather not
here?
have to send you this letter.
And that approach, not every time, but that works pretty well too.
Yeah. Something about making people feel like you're in it with them.
Yeah, and they're human.
It's not their yard, it's our yard.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get to the best solution here.
Yeah, and I know you got stuff going on. Like, can I get you an extension? You need a, we'll get you a lawnmower. Like, what can we do to help you?
That's interesting. That acknowledgement of the human on the other side is so vital. Is that something that you see in public service throughout a person's career? We just had a couple guests on. We talked about this idea that it's really easy to become cynical in public service, that when you've had enough interactions that didn't go well, it's easy to just take the cynical take of, this isn't really worth investing in them or doing, right? How have you held on to that optimism throughout your career so far?
That's a good question. I mean, we were talking earlier about people have no idea how the city works, so that's constant re-education. It's constant. Believe it or not, we did think about this for a little bit before we did it. Like, I promise you, we didn't just wake up and come up with this idea.
Nothing in government moves that fast anyway.
Yes, and I don't know what the secret is. I think that some people are predisposed to that commitment to public service and just seeing the bigger picture and knowing, like, hey, this interaction that's really tough, it's driving towards a bigger, better thing that we've been working on. And it's just something I have to navigate through. I don't know. I think there's some people who are predisposed to that and some people who are like, I could never do that.
Yeah, it's a tough job. It really is, but it's so rewarding. Seeing what could be, seeing the new stations pop up out of nowhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's
what'd you call it? A transfer station?
A transfer station. Oh, yeah. And that's that's one of the things, talking about advice to young people is, you do have a big impact, but that impact is going to be incremental and based on the routine of your work, right? So it's not a one and done. We're going to have to do this over and over and over and over again. And over time, we're going to have really substantial progress. But it's hard to see that, I don't know. It's a parenting advice too, right? I heard this great line, the days are long, but the years are short, right? Yes. And so that's the same thing.
Incredibly true.
Yeah. Like that routine and the grind of taking care of little kids, but you look back and you're like, wow, I'm really glad I was able to do that. Because it's really rewarding, but it was certainly tough in the moment.
That's when we think about advice for the younger generations. That's really good to help them understand. Now, that's one of those things time only teaches you.
Yes.
Like we were talking earlier, like your kids are very, very young. Mine have all moved out of the house. Looking back, I'm like, holy crap, there's nothing more true than the days are long, but the years are short. Because the years feel like they flew by. There were so many times in the middle of those years, I was like, are we going to survive? This is so difficult, and we're not making progress. And there's something about, I think, when people get so burned out that they're like, is this even worth it? Getting them some distance, getting them some perspective to say, you know what, it really is. Because I guarantee you, people that didn't know my kids or didn't spend every day with them, they would encounter them once every few months and be like, those kids are great. Look at how they're growing. Look at how they're progressing. And you're like, I guess so. Yeah. I didn't even notice,
great,
parenting is really interesting, but leading people is a lot like parenting kids.
Absolutely.
It's a very, very similar process.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of patience and a lot of sleepless nights.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things we're doing with all of these conversations is trying to facilitate a movement towards sustainability for our people. I'm a firm believer if our teams are burned out, we're not going to have good results, especially as a city. And so what do we need to rethink as a city to really be able to kind of establish that sustainable, thriving future for our people?
Yeah, I think, and And it's tough. It's a big order. I've thought about this question a lot, and I really think the answer is looking at people as individuals and having these bespoke, customized, professional or personal development plans.
Interesting.
We try to do a lot of things that are like, top down, like here's our personality assessment we do, here's how we work through it, here's, and the stuff that works for HR does not work for a heavy equipment operator, right?
Yeah.
And so customizing to the position and then customizing to the person. And that's a huge lift. I mean, that is. But I think that's the only way, because if somebody is like, gosh, my supervisor not only spent some time to understand like what my needs are, what my interests are, but outlined like, here's something you could work on to achieve that, and here's some resources to do that.
Yeah.
How is that not inspiring? But it can't be, here's the thing city management said we have to do.
Yes.
Here's the 20 webinars you have to take.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, and the trick is, we're all constrained by time and
That's
money.
It.
But people's ability, I think, to spend a little bit of time to understand, what do my employees, what do they want to be when they grow up, and how can I help them work towards that?
But what you said about it being contextualized for each person, I think is really fascinating because we're trying to achieve efficiency.
Yeah.
We really try to say, how do we create one thing that works for everybody? And so that's what's behind it. But ultimately, if it misses the mark, who cares if it's efficient?
Yeah.
And so there's something interesting to that. Can we be hyper efficient in certain things? Because I think a lot of the reason this doesn't happen is because when do we have the time?
Absolutely.
Where on the task list does go talk to Carl and find out what Carl wants to be when he grows up, right? And so because it's not on the list, it never happens. So I think part of it is, can we find efficiencies over here to say we are going to be intentionally inefficient in how we develop people? We are going to intentionally make it bespoke, person to person, which takes time.
Yeah.
So we're going to be efficient over here so we can be inefficient over here.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and so I don't have the solution, but, the trade-off, maybe we're inefficient here, but then, gosh, we have this really engaged employee who's like, wow, they invested in me. I am really comfortable investing my time here, right? So maybe you gain work quality, work quantity,
work longevity.
Yeah.
They're going to stay longer. Like there's so many benefits to that, even though it is inefficient. I'm a firm believer we should be inefficient about this.
Yeah.
It should be a person-to-person conversation. And it may be a thing where a leader says, I got 6 direct reports. Let's sit all 6 of them around a table as a start.
Yeah.
To say, hey, let's have a conversation over the next few weeks. We're going to meet once a week for 1 hour, and we're going to answer one question each time to get to where do you each want to go?
Yeah.
And maybe it is a group setting, but it is, you end up with different results for each person.
Yeah.
I think there's ways to do it and think about it, but that's such a great answer. I love that.
Well, and just it comes from personal experience. I got to do this great program called Leadership ICMA, and it's a 2-year, it's a cohort 2-year program. It's kind of intensive leadership development, and then you do a capstone project. And through that, I mean, you kind of you're forced to like write down like, what do I want to be when I grow up? How am I going to do that? What are my values? And then you go and you basically work as a consultant in another city and work on some big hairy problem that they have, and you have a white paper at the end that you publish.
That's cool. I'm curious, being on the outside coming into a city to work on their big hairy problem, you bring a different perspective, don't you?
Yeah. What was interesting, the town I got to work in was Needham, Massachusetts. So this is a affluent suburb outside of Boston. The average home, $2 million. Oof. They have 8 or 9 bargaining unions.
I don't know if that's just affluent.
That's right.
Really affluent.
So this is very different from Georgetown, right? And then amazingly enough, we had this great opportunity to do focus groups with their employees. I mean, they gave us full access, and it's like people want to be paid, right, competitively, but they also kind of want their boss to hear what they're doing and care about them, and then some flexible schedules. Like that was our big, it's like, okay, well, that just is everywhere, everything. So it was really that insight, like people are people, organizations are organizations, everywhere you go was really good. But the other great thing of that was this small network. There's probably about 20 of us who are really close. That's who I hang out with when I go to the ICMA conference. So people all over the country.
So when we're done, I'm expecting 19 names from you.
Absolutely.
Future guests on this show.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that was the best professional development I've ever done. But it was expensive, time consuming, and hit very few people, right? 20 out of however, thousands of members ICMA has. But that, I think to a person who's done it, they're like, that was the best.
It's also such an investment in the future, though, because you are probably going to have a very long career in public service. And over that time, you are going to impact just employees, probably tens of thousands of people over time. That makes a huge difference in tens of thousands of lives.
Yeah.
That cannot be overstated how valuable that is. I love that idea. That's really good. So your structure that you're in right now as an assistant director, how many people do you have that report directly to you?
Directly to me, I have 4, and probably total underneath me 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 4 that report directly to you, do you know what they all want to be when they grow up?
Some of them want to retire in a few years. So I'm trying to keep them around. I'm trying, they're like retirement eligible. So I'm like trying to keep their days good enough so they're not like, I don't need this anymore.
Yes. There's a lot of probably institutional knowledge with that group.
Yes,
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But I think we have done some good work. What's tough is these smaller departments, 1 or 2 people, once you're that department manager, there's not a lot of room to grow. So keeping them engaged on different cross-departmental things. And
since there are opportunities all over the place in public service.
And I always say, even if we lose somebody to promotion, at least they'll be an advocate for public works and better able to articulate our needs and our challenges, from their new position.
Well, plus it's proof you're doing something right if your people get promoted to different departments.
Yeah, as painful as it is.
Yeah, as painful as it is. And that's what's interesting? I think as leaders, we can be guilty of that, of looking at our team as it sits today and going, I'm done. And yet it is this, you're always going to be in this cycle of, oh man, somebody's promoted, so now I've got to replace them, get them trained up. It's never ending. And I think we can forget that sometime.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm curious, as you're a relatively young leader as an assistant director, have there ever been any challenges leading people that are closer to retirement age?
Yeah, it was actually, I think the challenges were more self-imposed. When I first, got a management opportunity, it was somebody, had 20 years of experience, and I was kind of talking to David at the time. I was like, well, what do you think they're going to think? I'm a lot younger than them. And David's like, well, are you worried they're going to be like, I have underwear that's older than you? And it's like, I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, it is what it is, right? Yeah. And so that was really empowering to be like, okay, they saw value in me, thought I could do this. And I think, again, not to keep reiterating it, but just being engaged, showing that you care, asking, so I'm really intentional on my one-on-ones. I go to where they office.
Are. That makes a huge difference. Yes.
I keep them on it's very routine. It's every week or every 2 weeks, kind of depending on, complexity of work at the time. And then there's always a personal touch at the beginning, like how is family, and know kids' names, know what they're doing, know spouse, know what the spouse does, and check in on that. And I think that has made, that was something I was kind of doing naturally, and then as I've gone, I've kind of more codified it in my brain, like this is a recipe that I can rinse and repeat.
What's interesting though is the recipe. There's something about cooking. You can tell when something is made with love and when it's not. You can follow the same recipe, but if you're not putting that heart into it, it makes a difference. It literally, you can taste it sometimes. Yeah. It's the same way here where I've had leaders where you seem to genuinely care. You genuinely love your people. So when you're asking how is Billy doing, you want to know how Billy's doing. You're not just checking a box. I've had leaders before who knew the recipe and they could check every one of the boxes, and the person walked out of the room going, that guy doesn't give a crap about me. Yeah. And so I think there's something to making sure that we are always healthy enough to do it with love and to not just say, I checked the boxes, we're done, out of the office now. I think you're probably doing a pretty good job of that.
I appreciate that. It's as I go further in my career, it's harder to maintain the, just as you're busier, you're like, gosh, it's hard to maintain. But I do look back and think, the bosses who showed that they cared and maintained that for a long time really made a big difference, really had an impact on me. So, it's important.
That is so cool. Jack, this has been such a good conversation.
Yeah, it's been great.
I think you and I are probably nerdy about very similar things.
Yeah.
So we're going to have more of these conversations.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for Leading Thriving Cities. You might also like our other podcast, The Leader Lab. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms and on YouTube. Just search for The Leader Lab. Each episode is under 10 minutes. It's just a quick thought to help you level up your leadership. You'll also find all the other leadership content we are putting out on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for @ForwardPartner.